Hello, and welcome back to another episode of KARDA-CAST. My name's Nico, and I play guitar in Kardashev, and this is going to be a solo podcast where I explore some ideas that the community have inquired about, and that I think would be fun to hear a unique single person's perspective from the band. Typically, our podcasts have multiple members from the band speaking with each other about different topics and ongoings. But today, it's going to be just me explaining the history of Kardashev, specifically, though, why we started Kardashev and what it meant to kind of create the music and the lyrics and the aesthetic and the branding, and how we decided to go from being a local band that played local shows to a band that was attempting to be as professional as possible to enter our future careers as professional musicians. So I hope to explain a little bit about that today. Come on with me. Let me bend your ear. So we've been asked this question a handful of times in different interviews and along the years that we've done Kardashev, and by new fans that find us and communicate with us. And as all of you know, we're very congenial. Well, at least I am. Some of us are too busy, or we just aren't really in the limelight very often, so it can be hard to find us. But I am always available online, whether it be through Discord, Twitter, Instagram. And the question that I get asked quite often is, why did we start Kardashev? And, where were we in our lives that we felt like it was time to kind of take Kardashev in a professional direction? So I'm going to try to answer that as best as possible. To begin this sort of story, I have to kind of go back to the band that I was in before Kardashev. This was a local band in Arizona called Composer Meet Corpse. After I had returned from going to university for 1 year in Flagstaff, which is where I met Mark, I was interested in trying to join a local band. So I joined up with this band. I tried out at their singer's house in their kitchen, and Mark actually was there for that. He came down because he was so excited that I was going to be in a band. Mark had always wanted to be in a band, and so he wanted to see what the tryout process was like. He was very supportive. So I tried out for the band. I made it in, and for about 2 years, I played local shows with that band every other weekend. We were the staple band in Phoenix when it came to melodic death metal. If you want to look it up, you can go to composermeetcorpse.bandcamp.com and you can listen to the singles and the albums that we recorded. But that band was sort of a Black Dahlia murder adjacent, if you will. It was one of those bands that was writing like fun, upbeat, energetic riffs and songs that had guitar solos and harmonies. It was the kind of band where like the guitarists walk up to one another on stage and they play harmonizing leads together. It was very kind of traditional in that way. There was 5 members. And of those members, there was our bass player, Chris. And for those of you who have been with Kardashev long enough or who have gone back in our catalog, Chris was our bass player for the first, it must have been 6 or 7 years of Kardashev's history. And Chris approached me one day about 1.5 years into my time with that band. And he said, "Hey, I'm not really feeling satisfied with the music that we're writing. I feel like my heart wants to go in a different direction than what we're currently doing with this configuration of band members. And if you feel the same way, you and I should start a new band." And I had similar feelings at that time. I was getting a little bit burnt out. I was tired of selling tickets every weekend to my friends and family. And then there was this weird like guilt trip, sort of like air to it all, where it's like, "Hey, we're playing another show this weekend. Can you want to grab some tickets and come hang out?" And they're like, I saw you guys like play 2 weekends ago and it was okay, but I really don't have the money, or I've got priorities. And so it became this song and dance that we weren't interested in. And so from a business perspective, Chris explained to me that he was actually more interested in like big tours. He didn't want to play local shows. He wanted to tour. He wanted to play festivals. He wanted to maybe even get signed to a record label. So I basically echoed those thoughts. I said, me too, man. I want bigger and better things. I really want to make this a career if I can. I think that would be great. I know it's going to be hard and we're going to have to work really hard, but I think I have some ideas on what I would like to personally do. And so as we discussed our vision of the future of our continued collaboration with music, I explained to him that I thought it would be a great idea to break the box that I was currently finding myself in. And that was a creative and mental box. It was the box of, I have 6 strings on my guitar. I have distortion and clean and delay as effects on the guitar. It was always tuned to drop C. And this was kind of the box I had created. I became comfortable in this box. And he said something similar. He said, yeah, he's like, I'm playing a 5-string and I feel like we're always playing in the same key or the same feeling riffs. Like the songs kind of don't really differentiate themselves. Not a lot of dynamics between it all. And this was like, weeks long conversation over text and in person and over margaritas and all kinds of different stuff. But we basically had come to the agreement that it was time to exit our old band and it was time to create something new. And when we were creating that new thing, I asked him if there were any other members of the band that we should bring with us. And we both sort of agreed that although it would be nice because we have a working history with them, we didn't think that any of the other members would really see the same vision that we did. Their priorities were going in another way, or their skills we didn't think were going to keep up with ours as we continued to advance into a new direction. And this isn't a character judgment. This is an evaluation that we made when we were ready to move on. So Chris and I told them we're starting a new band and we're going to be doing music on 7-string guitars with a 5-string bass, and that our influences, rather than being bands like Carnifex and the Black Dahlia Murder and Through the Eyes of the Dead, instead of bands like that inspiring us, we wanted to draw inspiration from the more progressive, atmospheric death metal bands that were coming out at that time. Remember, this was in 2011, 2010, somewhere in there. And so our focus was 3 bands. We liked very much to listen to The Contortionist, Aegean, and Fallujah. Those were the bands that were inspiring us. When we heard it, we were just in awe that they could create something that sounded so different and so good. So that was part of the impetus that made us want to create a new band, which inevitably became Kardashev. And I remember when we were having these conversations and we had agreed that it was just he and I moving forward and we'd have to find a drummer and a guitarist and a vocalist. I said to him, well, how are we going to find, I think the vocalist will be the most important part, although all of the elements are important. I said, I think that would be the hardest fringe thing for us to find is a good vocalist that can lead the charge of whatever music we were creating. And he said, well, I've got a couple of people that I know, but none of which I want to work with in a creative capacity. And I said, well, I met this guy in Flagstaff. His name's Mark Garrett. And he told me once that he really wanted to be in a metal band. And he liked listening to similar metal music that I did when we were hanging out together. And he said, well, we can give him a shot. We can try him out. And I said, okay, great. So I called Mark and I said, hey man, I know you're still living in Flagstaff and I'm down here in Tempe. Would you be interested in being in a band that Chris and I are going to create? It's going to be brand new. It's going to have elements of Fallujah, the Contortionist, and Aegean. We would love to have you try out for the singing or at least be the singer. And he said, yes, absolutely. I would love to do that. There was no hesitation in his voice. He said, I will drive down every weekend if I have to practice with you guys. He's like, I would really, really desperately love to be a part of this. Now, when it comes to each individual's reason for being a part of the band, I can't speak well for Chris other than his dissatisfaction with the current band we were in. But I can say for Mark that his mental well-being, his mental wellness, and he can confirm this. I'm sure he'll do an episode like this where he talks about his experience, and I would love to hear it or hear it again. We've talked about it before, but I wanted to share it with you guys. His mental health was not well. And he desperately needed something creative. He needed an outlet. He was writing a lot of poetry. He really wasn't in a mentally well place. So I think that he found this as an opportunity to really express himself and maybe like move past some of those emotions. So I'll bring you an episode with him talking about this too. I think it would be great for him to kind of do what I'm doing about the same subject matter. Okay, so he agreed to be a part of the project. And so I started writing. Now, I remember distinctly telling myself, like, if we're going to do this, I need to make some investments. I really got to get out of that creative box, those tools in my toolbox, the 6-string guitar and the traditional amplifier and the couple pedals. I need to move past that. I think we need to get more experimental. And at this time, we were listening to a lot of like the more djenty, spacey, proggy bands that were coming out in the metal scene, in the, the 2010s era. And so one of the bands was Tesseract, and Tesseract uses a multi-effects unit called an Axe-Effects, a fractal Axe-Effects unit. And so I went on Craigslist and I started doing some searching, and I found a guy who was in another local band who was selling one, and I bought it. And then I found a guy selling a 7-string for like $200. I think it was a Schecter Diamond 7-string. Yeah, nothing fancy. It was red. And so I said, okay, here it is. I'm going to buy this unit. I'm going to buy this guitar, and this is going to get me out of my creative box that I've found myself so comfortable in for years and years. Because up until this point, I had been playing guitar for 7 or 8 years, and it had always been a 6-string, down-tuned, just distortion, right? It was kind of like that. So I bought this multi-effects unit, and we started writing. And I started recording myself writing these riffs, and I put them on SoundCloud. And as they were hosted on SoundCloud, I would then take that link and I would post it on MySpace and Facebook. Actually, I don't think MySpace was still big back then. It might have just been Facebook. And I posted it on a Facebook Arizona Metal Musicians Facebook group, right? Within a couple of days, a guy replied to the post, and he said, "Hey man, thanks for posting this. I'm a drummer in Phoenix. I recorded some drums and put them on the track for you. What do you think?" And I listened to them, and it was like awesome. And that's actually available for you to listen to in the links down below. I have a SoundCloud link to that song in its really raw state. You're going to hear Mark's initial vocals on it. You're going to hear these drums that I actually programmed. They weren't the drums that came from James, this drummer. They were the ones that I demoed. So they're not going to sound great, but the whole thing doesn't sound great. And that's what's important about this. Very humble beginnings. So James said, "Hey, I wrote these drums," and I listened to it and I showed it to Mark and Chris, and they both said, "This is really awesome. We should get a hold of this guy and see if he wants to jam." So I asked him if he could meet us at our studio that we were still in with the old band, because we were in both bands for a while. We were still writing Kardashev and kind of figuring out how it was going to work, but we were still performing with and practicing with our old band. Chris and I were. So we invited James on an off day to come to our studio that we practiced in and to jam the music with us. And I called Mark and I said, "Hey, this guy James is coming down on Saturday. He's going to load his drums over here and we're going to jam through that first song that we wrote." And Mark said, "I'll be there." Like, he drove down from Flagstaff that morning, and he was there ready to go. At least that's what I remember. He might be able to clarify that, but he was ready to go. And so the four of us sat in that room, and Mark yelled into a microphone and I played these riffs, and, we collaborated as musicians like we were familiar. Like we were familiar with doing, Chris and I, each week, twice a week, with our band Composer Meet Corpse. We were in the room, we were given feedback, we'd start and stop, we'd run through the same section over and over again, to really solidify it, because this was the business model that we understood. We understood that becoming a cohesive band meant jamming together over and over again, to learn the nuances of each person's approach and creativity. So while we were doing this, Mark was sort of coming up with these lyrical ideas, and he really wasn't sure what it was going to be about. And at the same time, not in the same day, but this period of time over months, I wrote 2 more songs. And so those 3 songs initially were Tier 1, Global Exploration, Tier 2, Stellar Advancement, and Tier 3, Galactic Achievement. We didn't have those names. We didn't even know what to call ourselves, but we had 3 songs that we thought, this will be a good demo. And so at the same time that all of this was going on over a couple of months, a buddy of mine from high school, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out and he said, "Hey man, I heard that song you were putting together. I think it's pretty cool. I'm getting into Foley work, where I take these samples of audio and I combine them to create like a sort of scene, a scene of audio that, is relevant to your music, which I think right now is like space metal." And I was like, "Yeah, that's kind of what we're going for." And so he said, "Cool, I'll give you something in like a week." And so he gave us the song that you can hear on that demo, the opening track. It's called Initiative. And it kind of has like these piston sounds and these pressure sounds. And there's like this rising action right before Tier 1 comes in. And so he made that for us, and he just said, "Hey, here you go. This was a lot of fun, take care." And I actually never heard from him again. It's kind of funny. He arrived enthusiastically wanting to help and be a part. He delivered that, and then he sort of just fell off the face of the earth. I hope he's doing okay. So that was super cool. So we create this band, we start writing this music, and one day when we're playing Magic the Gathering, we're all talking, and Chris wasn't there. It was just James, Mark, and I. And Mark says it was Chris. I said it was James. We don't remember really. But somebody said, why don't we just call ourselves Kardashev? Because Mark is writing these first 3 songs lyrics around the Kardashev scale. And I think there was a lot of back and forth, but we all ultimately were just like, yeah, that's cool. Like, we can always change it. Like, no big deal, right? Like, we'll just call ourselves that, because we needed something to put on flyers and to like maybe make a shirt. And that's how Kardashev got started. Those were the reasons that I can remember of how we were dissatisfied with the direction of our old music, and we wanted to create Kardashev. Now, a couple of main things that were important with our creation was that we wanted to write music that was hard for us to play. It was challenging. It's almost as if we were breaking out of that creative box that we were so comfortable in. We wanted to make music that was not just sonically in the vein of those bands I had mentioned that inspired us, but also music that challenged us. And so we started composing outside of 4/4, which is the time signature that most music we wrote in the past was. We started writing outside of familiar keys. There were still guitar solos, but it was more about guitar leads. We also didn't have a second guitarist, and it wasn't for a lack of wanting. It was just simply that we didn't think that we really needed it at that point. I'm sure that other people in the band would have added to the creative diversity of the music, but we just never really made it a priority. And to this day, Kardashev has only ever had one guitarist, which is me. So we created this band, we wrote this record, and we did as much as we could to make this demo as valuable as possible for the public. And granted, we had no following. We hadn't played a show. We were still writing the demo music that we would inevitably play shows on, because we were still interested in local shows at that time. But we told ourselves, since we're making these investments into ourselves, that being Mark was driving down every so often to practice with us, and Chris was like teaching himself how to like write in different keys. And I was investing into the 7-string and the Axe effects and the recording software, and I was teaching myself how to record. We also all agreed that it would be important to have this professionally mixed and mastered. Now, this is an important part for those of you who are creative musicians or just creative types in general. You have to put the finishing touches on your product. Otherwise, it just looks like it's half done. I remember the analogy that we used when we were discussing the importance of paying the extra money for the mix and master. The analogy was, if you go to an interview with your shirt unbuttoned, you are just doing yourself a disservice, right? You could have taken the extra 30 seconds, and in this case, a couple $100, whatever it was, to really polish everything and make yourself look as presentable as possible. So that was something that we weren't really familiar with up until that point. We didn't know mixing and mastering engineers. We had worked with like recording engineers in the past, but we were trying to keep the overhead as low as possible for this project. We didn't want to like go to a really fancy studio and like spend thousands of dollars on a demo that maybe nobody would hear. So we started looking at the backs of the CDs that we owned, and specifically that of Fallujah, The Contortionist, and Aegean. And we all agreed that given the way that our music was sounding, and among those 3 bands, we really liked the sound of Aegean. We thought that their music was dense and powerful, and it had good atmosphere that we were also trying to emulate. So we looked at the back of the CD case, and sure enough, it said, engineered by Maya at SoundLayer. And so we Googled it, we found his contact, sent him an email, and he was elated to meet with us and get the process rolling, basically. So we created new music. We started jamming. We were all making tons of efforts and investments. And we had produced a demo for people to check out to see if it was anything novel or interesting. Now, looking back, I look at those songs, and besides Tier 3, I'm kind of like, cringe, right? Because that's what growth is. Growth is looking back and being like, I can't believe I was like that. That's how we know we're growing. But when we were in those moments, when we were there doing that thing, it was so exciting. everything was exciting. Every moment, every riff, every breakdown, every time Mark came up with these lyrics and we got to read them, we just could see this sci-fi setting in our head, and it was really, really fun. Now those moments still happen, but it's less and less frequent simply because we understand that this is just part of the process now. And I think in a way, you can become desensitized to the process and to the creative flow, but it's still gratifying. It's still fulfilling when you're in the process. Those of you who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I'm just kind of going off on a rant here. But the point was, it was so exciting that the day that we were going to release it was like June 10th, 2012 or something. I don't remember the date. It's on Bandcamp. Go check it out. Mark called me and he's like, "Hey, I want to be there when you press the release button. I want to be there when you," and I'm like, "Mark, I'm just going to Bandcamp and saying from private to public." He's like, I know, but it's like really important. And I was like, "Okay, yeah, come on down, dude. You can be here." And so we played Magic the Gathering at Denny's until like 11 o'clock at night. And then we went home and then we like quadruple checked everything. Like, okay, is the artwork done? Are the lyrics there? This. Where are we going to post it? We were trying to do it all ourselves. And for a long time, we did do it all ourselves. But I just remember the excitement of when we finally made it public and we sent a blast out to Facebook and SoundCloud and Twitter and whatever it would have been, and how enjoyable that was. It was a really awesome moment because we had finally invited people to not only listen, but criticize what we had been working so hard for. And the cool thing was, it really didn't matter if people said it was cool or not, or good, or like whatever. We just wanted to have the satisfaction of putting something into the world that didn't exist until we spent that blood, sweat, and tears, right? So it was a ton of fun. It was really awesome experience to work with Chris, who, I'd been working with for years at this point, but also James and Mark. Now, James had a process where he didn't actually record the drums. And this was very different from what we were used to from our previous band, where we spent thousands of dollars recording our drummer in a professional studio. Actually, it wasn't a professional, it was a home studio, but we'll call it professional. Doesn't matter. And what James did that was different is he would program the drums in Superior Drummer. He would import the song that I would write and that Chris would record on. Because usually I would write riffs, Chris would mirror the riffs and write with me. And then we'd deliver that to James, and then he would go on his laptop and he would write the drums for it and then send it back to me. And we'd all kind of have back and forth. That's always been the model with Kardashev. And it's because we're trying to keep the overhead low, right? We don't want to record the drums if we can avoid it, because it is one of the most expensive financial sinks that you can incorporate into the process. So he did that, and it sounded really good, but it also sounds very artificial. If you go back and listen, it's like, oh, you can tell that every hit is perfect and nothing has any variation. Every impact is the same. And I've heard this feedback over years, especially because we've been using that process ever since. We're getting better at it every release, but we still use software to help us produce the full record. That's just how it works. So we started Kardashev. We had these cool processes. We had these great effects. We had this technology that we were leveraging in order to expedite the recording and the creation process. And then we also had this no overhead thing, right? We weren't really paying any money except for to Maya, so he could mix and master the record. So it was kind of like we had learned a lot of lessons from our previous band, Chris and I, and we were applying those lessons to this band. We made some upfront investments, and bam, 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 we started putting all of these in place. And it's kind of great. We eventually came up with these 3 axioms that Kardashev abide by. And Alex, Mark, and Sean know these 3 because Mark and I talk about them a lot. But it comes down to these 3 axioms. The first one is never be afraid to write a shitty song. This was some wisdom that we got from our bass player, Chris, back in the day. I remember telling him one time that I was in a creative rut and I felt like all my riffs were the same, and I didn't really know what I was writing, and I kind of vented to him my frustration. And Chris, being wise as he is, he just looked at me and he said, "You know what, man? Don't be afraid to write a shitty song. Just put it out there. Just record whatever you've got. And if it's garbage, you move on. But it might not be. And that's where the value lies." And so we've abided by that ever since. And that was back in 2014 or 15 that he said that. And so that really freed up, again, another creative box that I had put around myself so that I could lift this weight of self-criticism to actually make an effort, even though I might think it will go nowhere. That's what happened with a lot of our songs. A lot of our songs go into this file that I called the graveyard file, which is where they never are going to get published as Kardashev because they just don't meet the standards that we've all agreed upon. And I have probably 20 or 30 songs in there from the years that may never see the light of day. And this is just part of the process now. But I love that he gave that to me. He gifted me with the idea that I don't have to write a perfect song or a perfect riff every time. So that was awesome. That's the first axiom. Don't be afraid to write a crappy song. The second axiom that we live by is if it sounds good, it is good. Now, this is like a only Sith stealing absolutes sort of mentality, but it's designed to reassure your confidence and to diminish your fears. If you can listen to something and it sounds good, like a gut feeling sounds good, it probably is good, and you don't need to be more critical of it. That's the end. Boom. If it sounds good, it is good. Move on. It helps with stagnation and analysis paralysis. It kind of invites you to move on. It says, hey, it sounds good. Go ahead. Keep going. Move on. And so that helps a lot with the creative process. And the last thing, the third axiom that we all try to abide by is try everything because you can always put it back. We work in a digital age. We work in a time where we're not burning tape and we're not spending money in the studio. We're not paying a producer and an engineer thousands of dollars to take up their time and space. We live in a time where we can do this on our own time. So not only should you not be afraid to write a crappy song, and should you be willing to try anything that sounds good, but also don't be afraid to try something that might suck, because you can always press Control Z, right? You can always load file. You can always just put it back to where it was when you were last comfortable with it. And so these three things really freed up the psychology in my mind that were stagnating me in previous bands and just up until that point in my creative career as a guitarist. And so I hope to instill these upon you, the listener. If it's something that you find yourself struggling with, if you feel like, oh, my stuff sounds the same, or I think this sounds good, but I'm not really sure. Or if you think I want to try this, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to put it back or to redo it or relearn it. Those are the rules that Kardashev lives by, and this is where it's gotten us. So as we wrap up this episode, I hope that you have some takeaways from it and that you found our early history kind of interesting. Not many people know about the bands that we came from and didn't come from, because as a reminder, Mark's never been in a band before. Kardashev is his first band, and I think it's absolutely incredible, and it's a good show of his character and his tenacity that Kardashev is the reason. Although I'm not putting words in his mouth, but from my perspective, Kardashev is the reason that he now has the confidence to have his own business as a vocal coach. He spent so much time not only teaching himself how to make the voices, how to modulate his voice in such a way, but he also went to school for speech language pathology. So he has an awareness of the anatomical functions of the human body when creating sound with the voice, and how it works and why it works. And those two things married very well together for him at this point in his life, because he can now inform others and help them be safe and learn how to do similar vocals to, vocalists out there that people aspire to sound like. So it's kind of beautiful how all of this kind of weaved together and gave him this opportunity, and how he's helped guide my career, because as most of you know, if the vocalist isn't that great, most people don't give the music the chance. And we just so happen that Mark works his butt off in order to help Kardashev be as best as possible. Sometimes when I feel like I'm slacking, I see Mark's ability to just say, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to hit these really high notes, or I'm going to layer my vocals in this way, or I'm going to syncopate my rhythms in such a way that it really inspires me to try something new. And so that's another creative box that he's lifting me out of. So next time on KARDA-CAST, I think what we'll talk about is I'll kind of explain what happened to our member changes, how those decisions are made, and if you yourself are in a creative project with other people, maybe it'll help shed some light onto how you can navigate those scenarios. But I appreciate you all listening today. If you can support us at Kardashevband.com, I would super duper appreciate it. Those of you who are watching this video on our website, I really appreciate your support already, and I hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.